The candles flickered on the cake Rowan had picked up last minute from the grocery store. 65 of them jammed unevenly into the frosting like an afterthought. The overhead light buzzed softly above our heads in the converted laundry nook we now called the dining area. A folding table stood between us, draped with a plastic tablecloth that curled at the corners. It was late March, but my storage room still clung to a winter chill that the cheap space heater couldn't shake. "Make a wish," Ma Rowan said with a grin, lifting his wine glass. His blazer still had the tags on a designer label I didn't recognize. He always liked to look sharp for photos, even if the setting was far from Instagram-worthy. I blew out the candles in one breath, mostly to get it over with. The smoke curled upward, blurring my son's face for a moment. He looked proud of himself, as if hosting this modest meal in the back of the villa somehow made him a good son. I offered a polite smile, the kind I'd perfected over the past 3 years. Rowan stood up and began slicing the cake with a plastic knife, muttering about how the frosting was too thick. I reached for the plates, setting one gently in front of him. That's when my phone buzzed. Marabel's name lit up the screen. I glanced at Rowan. He smirked. "Ah, the prodigal daughter calls." I answered with a quiet, "Hi, sweetheart." Her voice came in cheerful and clipped like always. "Happy birthday, Mom. I wish I could be there, but the board meeting got pushed to this week. Did Rowan throw you a nice little dinner?" I looked around the cramped space, the lone window taped over with bubble wrap to keep the draft out. "Yes," I said. "He did." "Good. And you're comfortable, right? You've been enjoying the villa?" she asked. Rowan had just poured himself another glass of wine. I watched the red liquid swirl up the sides, nearly to the rim. My throat went dry. "I live in the storage room," I said softly. The words came out quieter than I expected, but they landed like a bomb. Rowan's wine glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the concrete floor. For a moment, no one spoke. Mom Marabel's voice crackled. "What did you just say?" Rowan was already crouching to pick up the glass, his face pale. "Jesus, Ma," he muttered. "Why would you? I'll call you back," I told Marabel, hanging up without waiting for a reply. I stood up slowly. My knees ached, as they always did on cold nights, and the ache traveled upward into something else, something heavier. Rowan held a shard of the broken stem blood pooling where it had nicked his thumb. "You made it sound worse than it is," he said, not looking at me. But it was exactly as bad as it sounded, maybe worse. I turned away, walked to my narrow cot in the corner of the room, and sat down. My birthday cake sat untouched. The candle wax had melted into the frosting. Rowan busied himself with the mess on the floor, mumbling something I couldn't hear. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't dared admit for years. I had mistaken silence for peace. But it wasn't peace. It was erasure. And it started the day we moved into the villa. The villa had looked like something out of a lifestyle magazine the first time I saw it. White stone exterior, big bay windows, and a backyard that opened to a view of the hills just west of Austin. When Marabel handed me the keys, she wore that tight, efficient smile of hers, the one she used when she was trying to look proud without showing too much emotion. "You earned this, Mom," she said, placing the keys in my hand like a CEO sealing a deal. "You spent your whole life taking care of us. Now let us take care of you." I didn't know what to say. Gratitude welled up in my chest, thick and sharp, and I just nodded, blinking too fast to keep it together. She'd made her first $10 million that year, some app that got acquired by a company with a name I couldn't pronounce, and she said it was time to give back. The plan was simple. I would live in the villa, enjoy my retirement, maybe even plant a garden again. I hadn't had a garden since we lost the old house after Roy passed. Marabel had even arranged for a local service to bring groceries twice a week. Everything sounded so perfect. Then Rowan called. He was staying with friends in San Antonio at the time, between jobs again, though no one ever said it out loud. "Marabel's gonna burn out," he told me on the phone. "You know how she is. She works 20 hours a day. Let me move in. I'll handle stuff around the house, keep you company, make sure you're okay." He didn't ask me. He asked her, and she said yes. Within a month, he'd claimed the main bedroom, said it made more sense because it was closer to the kitchen. Then he started having friends over. Networking, he called it. I didn't recognize the kind of networking that involved loud music, empty bottles, and a rotation of strangers who called me Miss E and assumed I was the maid. The guest room filled up with Rowan's old boxes. The office became his studio. Eventually, the only quiet place left was the small storage room at the back of the house where the lawn chairs and paint cans were stored. He told me it would be temporary just until he cleared the space, but that was over 2 years ago. I made it work. A cot, a small hot plate. I bought a second-hand rug to cover the cold concrete floor. I hung up one of my old quilts to block the light from the window that faced the garbage bins. It was cramped, but I told myself it was enough. I told myself that having a roof over my head was already more than many women my age could claim. Rowan threw parties. I made appetizers. He asked me to keep to the back when guests arrived so the place looked more curated. Once someone asked if I was the housekeeper and Rowan didn't correct them. Just smiled and said she's family before walking away. The neighbors waved at me in the mornings. I waved back. I lied when they asked how I liked living there. It's peaceful, I would say. Quiet. Just what I need. And when Marabel called once every few weeks to check in, I'd say I was doing fine. That Rowan was a big help. That the villa was beautiful. Which in truth it was. But beauty means nothing when you're sleeping next to a water heater. Still, I said nothing. I kept quiet, kept busy, kept shrinking. Until the day I heard the knock that changed everything. Rowan stood in the doorway of the storage room, arms crossed, his voice sharp with annoyance. If it was really that bad, why didn't you tell me you never said anything about the AC? I looked up from the small pile of folded laundry on my cot. The unit had stopped working months ago, and I'd been relying on a desk fan from Goodwill. The summer heat clung to the walls like sweat. You were busy, I said quietly. He scoffed. Busy, I live here. You could have said something. I didn't remind him that I'd mentioned it twice, once in April, once in June, and both times he'd nodded vaguely and gone back to his phone. I didn't point out that asking for anything more than silence seemed to irritate him. Instead, I tucked a clean towel into my plastic bin and let the moment pass. There was a time I believed silence kept the peace. I learned that after Roy died and I had 2 children to feed and no savings to my name. He'd fallen through a faulty loading dock while working a night shift at the warehouse. Just like that, he was gone and the house became too big, too quiet, too expensive. I sold it a year later to pay for Marabel's college tuition. She'd gotten into Stanford on merit, but the scholarship didn't cover everything, not the housing, the books, the laptop she needed. I remember the way her voice trembled when she called from her dorm the first week. Mom, I feel so out of place here. So I wired her money I didn't have and told her she belonged exactly where she was. Rowan had a different path. Softer in some ways, but harder in others. He never quite found his footing, got into the wrong crowd after high school. At 22, I drove him to a rehab clinic 3 states away and paid for it with what was left of my retirement fund. I worked overnight shifts at the hospital cafeteria to make up the difference. When he came home, he promised things would be different. For a while they were, but the promises faded. The job interviews stopped, the bills didn't. Still, I gave him space. I gave him patience. I gave him this house really, though it wasn't mine to give, because I thought maybe proximity would help him find purpose again. I never imagined I'd become invisible in the process. He lingered in the doorway, arms now hanging loosely at his sides. I'll look into a window unit, he muttered. I nodded, knowing he wouldn't. Later that night, I stood barefoot in the garden after everyone had gone, letting the cool grass ground me. Somewhere in the house, Rowan laughed with someone on speakerphone. I turned away from the noise and walked toward the small patch of moonlight that always found the back corner of the yard. I had never stopped giving, but I was starting to wonder if I remembered how to want something for myself. That thought was still echoing through me the next morning when I heard the gate latch click and footsteps approach the house. The knock came just after 7. Not the hesitant tap of a neighbor or the lazy thud Rowan used when he forgot his key, but crisp, firm, and unmistakably hers. I opened the door, slowly blinking at the early light, and there she stood, Marabel, blazer draped over one-arm suitcase by her feet, phone in hand. Hi, Mom, she said, her voice tight. I had a last-minute client dinner last night. I didn't want to wake you, so I stayed at a hotel. I thought I'd swing by before the morning meetings. I stepped aside automatically, heart pounding. She hadn't been here in over a year. She stepped in and paused. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the cot, the rust-stained sink, the warped linoleum. Her nose twitched at the faint, persistent scent of mildew from the water heater leak that had never quite dried. "This is your room?" she asked. I opened my mouth, but the truth stuck in my throat. I nodded. Marabel didn't move at first. Then she turned sharply and walked out her heels, striking the concrete with clipped purpose. I followed her out into the yard and up the stone steps into the main house. She walked through it like someone moving through a stranger's life. The kitchen counters gleamed. The floors had been mopped for last night's gathering. Empty champagne flutes stood beside the sink. The back doors were still cracked open from where Rowan's friends had spilled out onto the patio. She turned to me. "You're living in a storage closet while he throws parties by the pool." Before I could answer, Rowan came stumbling out of his room, shirtless, rubbing his eyes. "Marabel," his voice cracked. "You didn't say you were coming." "I wasn't planning to," she snapped. "That was before I found out our mother has been sleeping next to a water heater while you played host in her house." Rowan blinked, then glanced at me. "It's not what it looks like." Her laugh was sharp and short. "Then by all means explain it to me. Make it make sense." I told her she could have the master. She said she didn't want it." I felt her eyes swing back to me and I couldn't meet them. Rowan kept going. She said she liked her space. Said the noise from the kitchen kept her up. I didn't force her in there. My hands curled at my sides. I had said those things, but not because they were true, because I'd been trying to make peace with what was already happening. Marabel stared at him, then turned back to me. "You never told me." "I didn't want to cause trouble," I murmured. Rowan rolled his eyes. "This is being blown out of proportion." "No," she said. Her voice was calm now, too calm. "You have no idea what proportion this is about to reach." She walked toward the foyer, already pulling her phone from her blazer pocket. I knew that tone. I'd heard it once when she fired a lawyer mid-call and again when she bought her first company in a handshake deal. And I knew without needing to ask that nothing in this house was ever going to be the same again. The next morning, the smell of bacon and cinnamon rolls crept through the cracks in the storage room door before I even opened my eyes. I heard voices laughing, music, champagne flutes clinking. Another one of Rowan's brunches. He hadn't said a word to me since Marabel's visit hadn't knocked on the storage door or asked how I was. He must have thought it would blow over like everything else. But I knew better now. I dressed slowly and slipped out through the back to avoid the guests. I sat near the garden wall, close enough to hear, but far enough to disappear. It wasn't until I heard Marabel's voice clear and sharp that I stood. "You're using the villa I bought for Mom to play host while she sleeps in the utility room." The music cut. Laughter died mid-breath. Marabel Rowan said with forced ease, "Can we not do this in front of people?" She didn't lower her voice. "No, actually, I think we should do this exactly here." A woman I didn't recognize gasped, followed by a whispered, "Wait, his mom sleeps," where Rowan chuckled thin and panicked. Mom said she was fine. I didn't force her. She said she was fine because she thought it would keep the peace. She didn't want to upset anyone. That's what she does. Marabel's tone cracked, then just enough to let the anger bleed through. "She could have told you," Rowan snapped. "It's not like I locked her in there, but you did fill every other room with your junk and your ego," Marabel snapped back. "And you let her live like that while pretending you were doing her a favor." I stepped closer to the open doors now, and some of the guests turned to look at me. I didn't flinch. Rowan glanced at me and tried to rally. "Mom, tell her you were okay with it." I didn't say a word. He looked around at the stunned faces, his voice rising. "She didn't ask for anything. How was I supposed to know she hated it?" "You weren't supposed to know," Marabel said. "You were supposed to care enough to look." Rowan stood there, blinking his hands, twitching at his sides. "So what now? I'm just kicked out." Marabel reached into her bag and pulled out a crisp envelope. She waved it once before opening it and pulling out a paper. "This villa," she said slowly, "is in my name. Title taxes, utilities, all me. You've been living here on borrowed space and borrowed time." His face drained of color. "I let you stay because you said you'd take care of her," she continued. "You didn't, and now you're done." The crowd began to shift, uncomfortable, looking anywhere but at us. "I have nowhere to go," Rowan muttered. "You should have thought of that before you decided to treat your mother like a burden." He looked at me, then really looked. "Mom, please." I held his gaze, steady and quiet. "You made your choices." A long silence followed. Then Rowan stormed inside, slamming the door behind him. Marabel turned to me, her voice softer now. "I'm changing the locks this afternoon." I knotted my throat tight. "Pack what you need," she said gently. "This house is yours again." I looked around at the patio, the broken champagne glass glinting near the door, the guests gathering their coats with downcast eyes. The spell had been broken, and as Marabel reached for my hand and led me up the steps toward the master bedroom, I knew the next knock on my door would come with open arms, not excuses. Rowan stood by the front door, a half-packed suitcase at his feet, and his pride crumbling in real time. "Just a few weeks," he said, his voice low, "till I figure something out." "I didn't know it was that bad, Ma. I didn't mean to." "You had 3 years," I said gently. 3 years to act like a son." He flinched. I almost softened, but I held my ground. Not from anger, there was none left, but from something sturdier. Self-respect, maybe. Or the slow return of it. He looked at me like he wanted to argue, but there was no fight left in him either. He lifted the suitcase and walked down the path toward the gate, muttering something I didn't catch. When he turned back one last time, his face was unreadable, something between sorrow and disbelief. I didn't wave. I didn't cry. He stepped out. The gate creaked as it swung open, and then I closed it behind him slowly, carefully. It was the first time I'd ever locked it from the inside. A few hours later, Mrs. Duval from next door knocked. Her eyes shifted between my face and the house behind me, as if recalibrating something. "We're so sorry, Eloise," she said. "We thought you were... well, we just didn't know." Another neighbor stopped by later with a pie. One woman from down the street came just to hold my hand for a few seconds and whisper, "I'm glad she came back for you. No one had ever come back for me before." I spent the rest of the day cleaning the master bedroom. Not out of obligation, but out of something that felt closer to hope. I opened the windows. I changed the linens. I moved the framed photo of Roy and the kids from the storage room shelf to the nightstand beside my new bed. That evening, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the trees, warm coffee in hand, silence wrapped around me like a friend. For once, it wasn't the silence of being dismissed. It was the kind that comes when there's nothing left to explain. And when the first fireflies blinked to life along the garden path, I stood barefoot in the cool grass and walked toward the part of the house I hadn't dared enter since the day Marabel gave me the keys. The villa feels different now, warmer, not because of the decor or the sunlight that pours through the windows, but because I finally move through it like I belong. The kitchen smells of cinnamon again, not because Rowan asked for it, but because I wanted the scent to linger. My garden has taken root in the back tomatoes, climbing higher than I expected, herbs spilling from their pots like they're trying to stretch into the next yard. On Saturdays, I invite neighbors over for coffee and banana bread. They come and they stay, and they call me by name. I bake for pleasure now, not performance. One afternoon, as I was clipping basil for a sauce, I hadn't even decided how to finish, yet the mail arrived. Tucked between utility bills and a coupon flyer was an envelope with crisp lettering on the front. Inside was a short letter from a local nonprofit that supports senior women in transition. "We've heard about your story at Red. Would you consider speaking at our next event? We'd love to feature your journey." I sat with the letter in my lap for a long time. I thought about the years I spent folding into corners, making myself smaller so others could stretch out. I thought about the nights I'd stood barefoot in the storage room, wondering if anyone would ever see me again. Now, someone had. And not because I begged, not because I proved my worth through endless sacrifice, but because I stopped hiding. I placed the letter on the kitchen counter beside a bowl of lemons and smiled. They thought I was invisible, but I was just waiting to bloom.